Tonight we're going to continue our series called Quarantine. This is our fourth installment in the series, and we've entitled it Easter Underground. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. They will see me there." While they were going, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests everything that had happened. After they had assembled with the elders and formed a plan, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, telling them, "You are to say his disciples came at night and stole his body while we were asleep." Verse 19. On the evening of that day, the first day of the week, the doors being locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said to them, "Peace be with you." I'm certain that you and I will always remember Easter Sunday 2020. I imagine it will stand out in our memory as the years pass. All my life, Easter has been a celebration like no other. In my memories of this day, spring has emerged after the bitter dullness of winter. The earth is once again carpeted in green. Flowers are in full bloom. Bluebonnets coat the Texas hillsides. The solemnity of the Passion Week yields to the joy and celebration of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's not how the disciples of Jesus spent the first Easter. After suffering through the excruciating, humiliating, terrifying scene at Golgotha, where the one in whom they had placed their faith and hope was stripped of his clothing and his dignity, mocked and cruelly tortured to death, these men were shaken to their core. To make matters worse, word had spread that someone had stolen the body of Jesus, and the Jewish officials were saying Jesus' disciples were the culprits. These men who had walked with Jesus for more than 3 years, witnessed the miracles that he had done, listened to teaching like no one had ever heard before in human history, and dared to believe in eternal life through him, were now living like outlaws and outcasts, holed up, hiding out in fear of their lives. What confusion they must have felt. If you look back just a week before, Jesus had been welcomed to Jerusalem by all of the people. There was singing and celebration, a great celebration. They were welcoming him as a king. And now these disciples who had been out in the forefront and been part of that great celebration were huddled together, whispering in hushed tones, fully aware that any sound of human activity from outside those walls could very well be the soldiers' boots on cobblestone. This was the first Easter Sunday, folks, and it was the first Easter underground. 2,000 years later, we find ourselves isolated, avoiding contact with the outside world, facing uncertainty. We wonder, what will the world look like going forward? How many of the freedoms that have been snatched for so-called good reasons today will we actually recover when all of this is over? How will this experience change our society and the way we do life? Is this what John foresaw, or the beginning of what John foresaw in the book of the Revelation? Before you go too far down the rabbit hole of self-pity and think that we're the first people since the apostles to suffer such an Easter, we need to realize that millions of Christians through the centuries have been forced underground to worship. In those early days, they were pursued and persecuted across continents. Paul himself, the great apostle who wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, before his conversion, before his name change, when he was Saul, he hunted Christians for a living. In the 3rd century, Christians retreated to the catacombs and held secret services to keep from being gathered up and put on trial for illegal worship. Even today, in places like communist China, persecution of Christians is state-sanctioned. Just a few months ago, on Christmas Day 2019, the Los Angeles Times published an article which they called, "For China's Underground Churches, This is No Easy Christmas." I want to read a snippet of that article. They start off by quoting a Chinese pastor. "Then they start to document you," said the pastor of a large house church in Chengdu, who spoke on the condition of anonymity. "Then your children cannot go to church. Then you have to plant a flag. Eventually, clergy are forced to change their sermons to align with social core values and paste Communist Party slogans on the walls. Having seen that process unfold at other churches, the pastor refused to register his church. Police began standing outside the church daily and following and harassing attendees. In August, his church left its makeshift sanctuary in an office building, breaking into small groups that met in houses instead. Church is not a location, the pastor said. Church is a group of people. His congregation has been preparing for his arrest, hiring lawyers and training members to lead smaller fellowship groups if he and the elders disappear. I think my first exposure to the persecution of Christians was when I was a young teen and I was attending a Christian school that was hosted by the church we attended. And part of the required reading was a book called The Hiding Place by Corrie ten Boom. Some of you have probably read it. It's really a Christian classic. And not just a Christian classic, it's a classic. And I want to tell you a little bit about the story of Corrie ten Boom because I'm going to use some quotes from her for tonight's sermon. I found a good article on her on biography.com, and I just want to read that because it tells the story, encapsulates her life during those tumultuous years. It starts like this. Cornelia Arnolda Johanna ten Boom was born on April 15th, 1892 in Haarlem, Netherlands, near Amsterdam. Known as Corrie all her life, she was the youngest child with two sisters, Betsy and Nolly, and one brother, Willem. Their father, Casper, was a jeweler and a watchmaker. Cornelia was named after her mother. The ten Boom family lived in the Beige house in Haarlem in rooms above Casper's watch shop. Family members were strict Calvinists in the Dutch Reformed Church. Faith inspired them to serve society, offering shelter, food, and money to those in need. In this tradition, the family held a deep respect for the Jewish community in Amsterdam, considering them God's ancient people. In May 1940, the German Blitzkrieg ran through the Netherlands and the other Low Countries. Within months, the Nazification of the Dutch people began, and the quiet life of the ten Boom family was changed forever. During the war, the Beige house became a refuge for Jews, students, and intellectuals. The facade of the watch shop made the house an ideal front for these activities. A secret room, no larger than a small wardrobe closet, was built into Corrie's bedroom behind a false wall. The space could hold up to 6 people, all of whom had to stand quiet and still. A crude ventilation system was installed to provide air for the occupants. When security sweeps came through the neighborhood, a buzzer in the house would signal danger, allowing the refugees a little over a minute to seek sanctuary in the hiding place. The entire ten Boom family became active in the Dutch resistance, risking their lives, harboring those hunted by the Gestapo. Corrie ten Boom became a leader in the Beige movement, overseeing a network of safe houses in the country. Through these activities, it was estimated that 800 Jews' lives were saved. On February 28, 1944, a Dutch informant told the Nazis of the ten Boom's activities, and the Gestapo raided their home. They kept the house under surveillance, and by the end of the day, 35 people, including the entire ten Boom family, were arrested. Although German soldiers thoroughly searched the house, they didn't find the half-dozen Jews safely concealed in the hiding place. The 6 stayed in the cramped space for nearly 3 days before being rescued by the Dutch underground. All ten Boom family members were incarcerated, including Corrie's 84-year-old father, who would die in prison. Corrie and her sister Betsy were remanded to the notorious Ravensbrück concentration camp near Berlin. Betsy died there on December 16, 1944. 12 days later, Corrie was released for reasons not completely known. The Hiding Place is a classic because it tells the incredible story of her life, but it's also a classic because this amazing woman of faith had an uncanny ability. She mastered the practice of reducing great theological truths into memorable quotes. What I want to do is I want to share some of my favorite quotes from her book, and in so doing, I will give you some Easter Underground practical theology according to Corrie ten Boom. Number 1, worry gets you nowhere. This is what Corrie said. Worrying is carrying tomorrow's load with today's strength, carrying 2 days at once. It is moving into tomorrow ahead of time. Worrying doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrow. It empties today of its strength. You know, I've often thought that worry is like a bad loan with high interest. It's all cost and no benefit. Worry and faith are mutually exclusive. If you're worrying, you're not practicing faith. And if you're practicing faith, then you're not worrying. The second theological truth I find from The Hiding Place is this: security in things is not security at all. This is what Corey said. Hold everything in your hands lightly. Otherwise, it hurts when God pries open your fingers. Wow. David, that great king and shepherd and warrior and general, he told his people in Psalm chapter 20, verse 7, some trust in chariots and others in horses, but we trust in the Lord our God. Listen, I'm as fiercely American as anybody I know. I love the heritage that we own as Americans. But if you think your security is in the Constitution or the government of the United States or any other human document or institution, I'm telling you, you're mistaken. The things we hold so dearly may be pried from our fingers as easily as a pandemic sweeps across international borders. We don't know what tomorrow holds, and we don't know how long we will have the securities that we hold on to so dearly today. Number 3, the third lesson, is this. Less is more, or you could say reduction opens the eyes of realization. This is what she said. You can never learn that Christ is all you need until Christ is all you have. It's true of the human condition that we will hedge our bet. As long as we have something we consider more tangible to lean on, we will. It's when we are reduced to nothing, when you are driven to your knees, when you are out of answers and avenues, that's when you will learn the truth that Jesus really is everything you need. Number 4, prayer is a borderless power. Prayer is a borderless power. This is what she said. What wings are to a bird and sails to a ship, so is prayer to the soul. You can lock a Christian in a prison cell or drive him or her into the catacombs or a safe house or a concentration camp or isolation and social distancing, but you cannot seal off prayer. It seeps through concrete, it soars through space, it saws through the iron bars of fear. Prayer overpowers every predicament, whether it is paving the way out or pushing the person through. Prayer is power. The 5th lesson that we learned from the hiding place is love hurts. This is the quote that I got from the book. Do you know what hurts so very much? It's love. Love is the strongest force in the world, and when it is blocked, that means pain. There are 2 things we can do when this happens. We can kill that love so that it stops hurting, but then, of course, part of us dies too. Or we can ask God to open up another route for that love to travel. The temptation during times of trial or loss is to protect your heart, to refuse to risk it. But it's then that love matters most, not just to the ones to whom it is extended, but to you, the one who still gives it. So that brings me to the 6th and final point, and that is this. Love conquers all. There is no pit, Corey said, there is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still. Whether you're among 12 trembling disciples hidden away in Jerusalem, or a Jew on the run from Nazism and hiding in a closet in the Netherlands, or you're isolated from society because of a virus and a government mandate. Whether you're sinking in a river of debt or swimming in a sea of uncertainty, you can be certain the love of God is deeper than the hole in which you were buried. The love of God is greater far than tongue or pen can ever tell. It goes beyond the highest star and reaches to the lowest hell. Could we with ink the ocean fill, and were the skies of parchment made, were every stalk on earth a quill, and every man a scribe by trade? To write the love of God above would drain the ocean dry, nor could the scroll contain the whole, though stretched from sky to sky. O love of God, how rich and pure, how measureless and strong, it shall forevermore endure the saints and angels' song.